Hello, my dear potheads. It's me. Uh, Balls. Lethal Company is an online multiplayer horror game that's garnered quite a bit of attention recently, and honestly, rightfully so. I think that it's earned the hype. Lethal Company is a game that doesn't really have much of a story, but it's basically an arcade-style multiplayer horror game where you want to get as far in as possible. So basically, you're given a handful of days to complete your quota, which is accomplished by going to various moons and collecting waste and garbage and things left behind on the moons, and bringing it back and, on the last day, selling it to the company you're working for. If you do not meet your quota, well, that's when the company becomes lethal, and boom. Lethal Company is basically the face of online multiplayer horror currently. So, think stuff like Phasmophobia as its competitors. And Lethal Company, I'd say it does things noticeably differently, and I think that's quite cool and very respectable. Not only does it go for a more arcade style, but also its enemies are a little more engaging to face than many other enemies. Obviously, some can hear you, but every single enemy kind of does a different thing. The worm will come up out of the ground outside of the facility. There are dogs outside of the facility that will listen for you, and then there are ones inside the facility, which, stuff like thumpers, which basically just run around manically and will basically instantly kill you, or stuff like loot bugs, where you just have to give them a random item and they will leave you alone. There's a lot of diversity, making for an ever-engaging gameplay loop, especially because the layout of each facility on the moon where you collect the garbage is randomized. I think that's really cool. It's interesting. It keeps stuff fun. Lethal Company is quite the refreshing game to have as part of the multiplayer horror scene. It feels like we've been doing the same damn thing for many, many years of, hey, run around, grab a few things while you get hunted by this one spooky. Think, again, stuff like Devour and all that stuff. It's basically just that. So I'm really happy that Lethal Company exists, and I love the way it is. Unfortunately, it's not without its problems. Arguably the biggest problem actually isn't the fault of the devs, but it's the absolutely god-awful player base. If you're playing not with friends, well, I'm sorry in advance, because 50% of the people are like 8 years old and think saying the word shit is cool. 25% of the people are like 20-year-old white dudes that really love to just confidently say the N-word. And the other 25%, well, congratulations, they're pretty chill. Good luck getting them in your lobby, considering you have to compete with the 75% garbage, and half the time you don't even get a full lobby for a pretty decently long time. But, hey, when you do get a good lobby, it's quite pleasant. Though I'd advise just playing with friends instead. It's ultimately the significantly better way to experience the game. Something that Lethal Company really does get right is its atmosphere. Now, obviously, we've had horror games that have had proximity chat before, but this really does do it really well. Walking around in this dark facility, assuming you don't have a really good flashlight, is really cool, especially because it's really, really easy to get lost and separated from your friends. So maybe you won't hear them, and then all of a sudden you'll walk across their dead body and go, oh shit. Lethal Company's atmosphere is something that really is not rivaled in the multiplayer horror uh, genre. Nothing else really has nailed it down quite as well as Lethal has. I also want to give a little bit of praise toward Lethal's graphics. It's not quite PS1 style graphics or anything, but it's got an old-ish vibe that I quite like. It's interesting and it lets it stand out. If you see something in the style of Lethal, you will recognize it as the style of Lethal. Nothing else. Lethal Company's popularity has been largely pushed by YouTubers playing it. Not only is it extremely interesting and can get you into quite funny scenarios, I suppose, but also mods have made for quite unusual gameplay, which YouTubers have just eaten up. There are mods everywhere from having up to like 40 people in a lethal lobby to just recoloring to new enemies. There's all sorts of mods out there, and the community is constantly making new ones, which is cool. I'm glad to see a horror game get so many mods, because that's not terribly frequent, if we're being honest. And I'm very, very happy that they're doing that. I'm not sure if it exists. I'd love for a mod to fix some of the problems with the proximity chat, because, it's a little buggy, but, I digress. Lethal Company's popularity is ever going up, and it seems like it will not peak for a little while longer. But the popularity of Lethal Company brings up a question. What's next? I'd say there hasn't been a game that's been the true face of the multiplayer horror genre since Phasmophobia. Now Lethal comes along. What's next after Lethal? Lethal's changed up the formula a little. But will the next thing that truly takes over the scene be something totally new, or will it go back to basics? I find this question interesting to think about, and I hope that we can continue to get interesting and new things in the scene. But Lethal Company will not be dead anytime soon, I bet. Especially because there are still planned updates. Lethal Company is quite the entertaining and interesting game, and I really, really do highly recommend it, and have genuinely been convinced that it does deserve the hype, despite the fact that my previous stance was that it did not. I used to say that it didn't do enough different. I used to say it didn't innovate enough. But I think that's bullshit. Not only does it do new things that really do make it really interesting and unique, but also it's an endlessly fun game. So for that, the devs have my respect, and I really do recommend the game, and think that it's worth the low price that it is at on Steam. So, if you weren't familiar with Lethal Company, I hope I've educated you sufficiently, and I hope that you're interested in checking it out. Nom nom.